Hey everyone, today we're doing kind of a 3-in-1 tutorial on how to draw an outline, how to shade and finish your design, and also how to transfer from the advanced template to the normal template. I'm gonna put an example on the screen of what it's gonna look like when we're done. I got requested to do overalls, so that is what we're gonna do today. The shading can apply to really any jean texture, or the techniques can apply to any clothing type as long as you pay attention to how I am applying it to the design. So let's get started. What I like to do first is open Pinterest and I search up whatever type of clothing I'm looking for, or I just scroll on my main page. Since today I'm doing overalls, I put overalls in the search bar, and right here I'm just scrolling and looking for a good image I can use as a reference. A good image will be either flat or on like a person, so you can see like what the shading is. For this one I did this basic reference, but it ends up turning out okay. Next I'm gonna open Procreate, which is what I use to design. And I'm gonna show you guys some of the brushes that I use. This is for outlining. I use pretty basic brushes. I don't really know where I found them, or if I got them like off someone else's brush pack. I'm not too sure, because I ended up making my own brush pack that I like to use when I design. So I use this fine line brush, and then I use a tech pen brush. I think the tech pen brush is actually like a generic one that Procreate gives you, and I'm not sure where that third one is from, but I actually didn't end up using it for this outline, I don't think. So that's the brushes I use. What I'm doing right here is I'm just inserting the file of my reference that I found on Pinterest. I'm gonna upload that to Procreate, and I'm gonna insert it into the template, and I'm gonna move it off to the side to where it's not blocking off any of the drawing areas. For the purpose of this video, I'm gonna use the advanced template. So what you see me doing here is turning off the basic template and switching to the advanced template. I already have it preset to where when I duplicate a project, it already has my template and my advanced template ready to go if I'm deciding to use them. Next I just turn on what's called Drawing Assist. It's basically like a mirror tool, and I line it up in those dots that I circled and make sure it's between those two colors so that it's even on both sides of the design. And then I'm going to make a new layer on top of that, and that's the layer I'm going to design with. Now this is where I start the actual outlining process. It takes quite a bit of time. I like to be very thorough and make sure I have all the details. Basically what I do is I'm looking at my reference off to the side, and I'm just drawing any shape that you see. So if you see like the pocket and the zippers and the buttons, I'm putting all those with outlines, like just drawing the basic shape out. I like to aim the waist for those bottom lines on the advanced template, but if you're not using the advanced template, you just eyeball it, and you really learn where everything goes the more you design. It takes some getting used to, so I'm just going to fast forward through this outlining process, but you're welcome to slow it down and see how I transferred everything over from the reference to the outline. I'm going to explain a little bit how I line up the back with the front straps and like the top of the torso. I basically clip it and I bring it over to the top of the back of the torso that you see there. I don't really know what that spot's used for, but that's what I use it for. I bring it over and then I can just line it up from there. Right here is where I start color picking. I basically pick out colors from my reference that I'm going to use to color in and shade and add wrinkles and all that jazz. I do this instead of adding black and white overlaid colors because it just makes it more seamless and you can add a lot more depth this way. And then right here I'm just moving it over and I move it to where it's not covering any of the parts that I'm currently working on. After that, I go ahead and fill in the entire outline with my base color. Right here, I go ahead and color pick one of the darker colors from the color palette, and I start drawing lines between all of the hemming in the denim because it adds like that worn denim look, which we're trying to achieve with the shading. So I basically just go over the whole outline and draw those lines with a slight curve, but not too much of a curve, on all of the hems. Right here, I keep using that darker color and I go in and all of the tiny 1 pixel seams I fill in with the darker color, just to make sure that it blends nicely and shows that there's a seam there. I later change the opacity of this. I lower the opacity a little bit, but this is just to give it the shape whenever the outline is less visible, whenever you turn the opacity down after you're done designing. After that is when I start doing the main wrinkles slash shading darker parts. I usually use references for this. My reference wasn't as detailed, but if you have more detailed references, it's easier to see where the wrinkles will go. But you also pick it up and learn as you progress in your designing. I've done this for a few years, so I kind of know where to place them, but making sure you have a very detailed reference shows you like exactly where to put things. But you can also follow along what I'm doing and see where I'm placing mine. I wouldn't recommend placing them all in random places because that just makes things look messy and not like flowy. I don't know, like it doesn't fit the design right. So make sure you're putting them in the right places. After adding all of the darker wrinkles, I go ahead and use a smudge tool with the same brush as I was doing the lines with. You don't want to smudge them out too much, but you want to kind of taper the ends a little bit and soften one side of them while leaving like the other side of the line sharp. Because if you blur things out too much, it'll start to look messy and won't be like it won't add as much detail to your design, which is what you're trying to do here. After that, I kind of just filled in the pocket a little bit. I filled in the seam that I was supposed to beforehand. I added that on the same layer as the seams that I filled in prior, and then I filled in the tag to be white on the pocket. After I finished the pocket, I went and picked the lighter color and I started adding the same lines as before. I kind of usually put the highlight lines between the darker lines or on one side of them. It kind of depends what side of the design it's on. I kind of base it off of, like, if it's on the left side, I kind of put the highlight on the left side, or if it's on the top, I put the highlight closer to the top. Just imagining where the light would be hitting the clothing, but you also can use your reference for this. Again, if you have a more detailed reference, unlike me, you would be able to see exactly where these highlights go. Once the highlight lines are drawn, I go back in and I smudge them exactly how I did the darker lines. The step after this is box shading. So first I start with the darker color and I put lines on all of the edges of the clothing. And this is basically just to give it some depth, and we're going to blur it a little bit after this so that it evens out and blends into the clothing. Here I take the highlight color and I kind of box in where some highlight would be. I like to avoid the darker wrinkle sections because those are supposed to be darker, so you don't want to put highlight on top of, like, a shadow, because it wouldn't really blend well. So you want to box in these and try to avoid the darker lines as much as possible. I kind of just put a little square or shape in every box depending on, like, the shape of the clothing. Like on the top of these parts, I put kind of like triangles because they're less boxy and more triangular. It really just depends. To blend these out, I use kind of a large smudge tool. I like to use a large one because it lets you move it farther and really manipulate where you want it to go. Again, I'm avoiding the darker lines and I'm kind of going with the shape. So I put them in between the darker shading, and you can just mess with this and see what looks good depending on how you added your other shading layers. I like to make sure to avoid I know I said this 20 times, but avoid the other shading because it'll clash and make everything look more messy. After finishing the shading, I went to my server that I created where I have a bunch of free assets, and I went to the pattern section to go find some textures that I could use for this specific design, and I ended up settling on one of the jean textures, and I'm going to show you how to use these textures on your clothing in just a second. So to start, I insert the file of the pattern that I downloaded, and I do this in a layer above the shading. Sometimes I do it below the shading, but most of the time I do it above the shading because it just blends in better. It just depends on the design. So I ended up not using that first pattern I tried, and I used this jean pattern. I basically resized it and made sure it fit across the whole section of a design. After that, you want to add a clipping mask to the shading and color of your design so that you don't have to go erase all of it. I also go and set it to overlay to where it overlays the design instead of drowning out all of the shading and colors that were there before. And I also lowered the opacity so that it's not like all the texture instead of the actual design that we just worked on. The next thing I did was the hardware on the denim, so the metal buttons and the metal clips that clip to the front. I basically chose a gray color, and then I take a lighter color and go over just the top of it, and then I take a darker color and I go over just the bottom of it on a clipping mask, and then I blur them out to make them actually look like they're metal instead of being flat, so they look a little bit reflective. Next is just some final touch-ups. I realized I forgot to shade the pockets completely, so I went ahead and did that, and I also fixed some of the shading that I had skipped over. Nothing too important, so I'm just gonna speed through this. All that's left is switching the advanced template to the normal template, which I can do a more in-depth video on, but I have a little video that shows me doing it on the outline, just not on the actual design. And here is the finished look. I ended up adding a long sleeve shirt under it. You can do anything with it really. I hope this helped with shading, and yeah.